Hello and welcome back to part 2 of painting miniatures with random fandoms. And today I am going to be working on some of the shading for the miniature that I started last time. If you can see in the progress that has been made, I mentioned at the end of the last episode that I was going to clean her up a little bit. I did take some time to do that. Just make sure that all of the lines are nice and clean and I didn't have paint splotched anywhere and that the details were what I wanted them to be. To do this, I actually made use of a magnifier glass. I have an LED light right here that has a magnifier in the top. Again, an easy thing to pick up at hobby stores or office stores. Just, I recommend it if you have any difficulties at all with your eyesight, or if your eyes are getting a little old like mine. It really comes in handy to be able to put that little mini under a microscope and really see what you're doing. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the second layer of especially her dress, and then I'm going to dry brush her hair a little bit to show you what kind of an effect that can give, and then we'll also do a little bit of painting on the cloak to show you the differences between the contrasts when you're starting with a really dark contrast. I've done a little bit of experimenting. Now, normally I would just simply do this a little bit on the fly, but I did want to show everyone what this kind of looks like. There are some different ways of doing your layering techniques, and you can either go with like a really high contrast or not so high, like you can actually use contrasting colors if you wanted, or you could go with a very subtle shading up effect, which is what I was trying here. I started with my base color and then just added some gray, a little bit more gray, so I got like 3 different tones. I think what I'm going to do though is I'm going to do a little bit more high contrast, which is this. That's about half of the base color plus the same amount of a white color. And then for the ruffle, same thing. I'm actually going to go with this combination, which there's the base coat and there's like a bone white, which is what I'm going to put up for the second layer. Okay, so way to do that. So here's our base coat, and I've mixed these ahead of time. If you were wondering what the toothpicks were doing out last time around, toothpicks are really good for mixing paint. So I'm going to just do a quick stir and then just drop some paint into my egg cup. This paint's a little on the thick side. Also, we're gonna need a lot of it, so I'm not being too stingy here. Okay. All right. So there's my base. And here is the white. This is from the Citadel. I'm mixing my companies. The other one is a Reaper slate blue, and then the base is called a Corax white. It almost looks gray in the light, but once you mix it and you drop it out, it's a good white color. And because I don't want to mix the blue in with my white pot, I'm gonna drip it on the side here. A little more. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna mix them in and go for that same color that I had on my test sheet. Might need a little more white, but we'll see how it goes. So for this, we are covering a fair amount of space. So I'm gonna start, I think, with my detail brush. That's the largest one that I use most of the time. Take a deep breath. And we'll begin. So the point of the contrasting is you want to leave your first color in the crevices. Just get a nice flowing line for the next color as much as possible. And you really want to think of this like, say, a painting. If you think of paintings that you've seen where you can see how the artist has pulled the colors up and left the darker colors deep in the folds, that just gives that illusion of depth and richness to fabrics. That's really what we're doing here. And just think about using the lines of the mini as your guide. And just do your best to gauge where to put the paint. There's no right or wrong here. This is really a case of artist discretion. One thing to think about as you're doing this too is to think about sort of how the light would play on a dress like that. So, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect lines by any means. But this is where having a slightly wetter brush could come in handy if you want to just kind of try and blend it a little bit more. Like that. Okay, well, that's a start. Now for the ruffle. Again, for that one, I'm just going to use this bone white. It's called Wraith Bone. Citadel has some great names. So this time I'm kind of using the gray-blue as my guide for for where I'm gonna put the biggest bits of the bone. Okay, and as she's coming along here, you can kind of see how the ruffle is taking shape. A little bit more of a high contrast compared to the skirt, but I think that's just fine. I'm also using more paint because these parts feel flatter to me. I just want to get it kind of sharp for this part. A little less blending, a little more pure tone. Not too worried about the line between the blue and the ruffle just yet. I have a thought for that as I go along. To do something with that to sort of trim it out. And for this, I am actually going to add more paint, like almost a second coat as I go around, because I want this to be a little more pristine down along the ruffle. I just think I'm going to fix a little something here on the side. Perhaps with my finer brush. Now, one thing you can do if you're using this mix and you start to dry out a little bit, you can add a drop of water. I wouldn't recommend doing a lot of this, but you can bring your color back. Just adding a little bit of water to your mixed color. And there you can kind of see we've got a little more paint to work with there. Like I say, that's the great thing about acrylic paint. It is water-based, so you can do this pretty easily. You don't want it getting too thin, so I would do this sparingly. I wasn't too happy with that little bit right there, so I'm gonna go back over it. Just a little bit of the original color. Just very kind of bring that pleat back in, and then I'll decide if I need to go back again. Yeah, I like that better. And then back again. So, dry brushing. Dry brushing is a way to get just a highlight of color on spots that you want to give a sense of, say, movement or, again, depth to. And there's a couple of terms. There's dry brushing and then there's overbrushing. Overbrushing just really means you leave more paint on your brush, and dry brushing is kind of exactly what it sounds like. We are going to, rather than use a wet brush, we're going to use a brush that is dry, that's been loaded with paint, and then most of the paint gets knocked off. And I'll just show you this. So I'm gonna try this for her hair. Remember I said she was going to be a blonde, so this is going to be like the second layer of the hair. And what I have here is one of my favorite brushes for dry brushing. It's actually been trimmed off a little bit, so it's got a flat edge. If you notice, it's not sharp like my other brushes. This one, you really don't have to worry too much about keeping it in good shape. In fact, the fuzzier sometimes the better. So this is a really good paint for dry brushing. So for dry brushing, again, this time instead of using small amounts of paint, you really want to load your brush up, but then we're knocking most of it off. So paper towel, and you just start whisking your brush across the paper towel. Remember, there's no water in here until you almost can't see the color coming off. Then, wherever you are going to be doing the dry brushing, then you just start. Similar technique, you're going to swipe it either back and forth or up and down, whichever gives you the best effect. I'm going to start by back and forth. And the goal here really is to get that paint just on the top details. So it gives you a little bit more of a subtle effect versus the overbrushing that, or the second layering that we did on her dress. And the idea then too is that then the detail of her curls really begins to stand out. And she starts to look a little more blonde. Last thing I'm going to show you tonight is the cloak that we did with the black instead of with a lighter color for the first layer. I was wanting to see how that would turn out if we did that, so that we'd have a little bit of a higher contrast in the two colors that we're putting together. So for the cloak, I'm going to do this sort of cobalt blue. And same as with the dress, following the curves of the cloth. And I'm just going to start up here. And you can kind of see, if you try to keep a light touch and brush really sort of gently over the figure, how just doing that light stroke kind of does some of the work for you. where it just naturally starts picking up the high points. And one thing to note with the darker contrast, it's fairly forgiving. It can look pretty cool even when you don't get the paint exactly where you want it. And if there's times like I just did just there where I kind of got too much color, that's where having some clean water comes in handy, because then you can kind of draw out as long as it's still wet. You can draw out your shade a little more with just a wet brush. So, next time I will show you some more about the finer details. We'll do a little bit of inking and then hopefully the final layer. I hope you enjoyed.